question, and that there was a...
You think social media companies owned by foreign governments that are adversaries of the United States, that are known to use information warfare against the United States, do you believe they should be able to operate freely in the United States?
As a technology company, our area of expertise is making sure that they are not distributing malware. We have found situations where such companies were distributing malware, at which point we remove them from our services. But on the broader question of accessibility, I think that's a question for Congress.
I'll put you down as undecided. Mr. Smith?
You can put me down as I think you all have already decided. The Congress has passed a law, the President has signed it, the courts will adjudicate it, but assuming it's upheld, then clearly it needs to be followed. And I'm not going to try to substitute my judgment for the judgment you all have already brought to bear.
Mr. Clegg?
In addition to that, I would just point out that there isn't a level playing field globally. Our services, for instance, are not available to people in China. So Chinese social media apps are available here, but American social media apps are not available in China. That has been the sort of state of affairs for some time.
What I'm looking for is some guiding principles here. And Mr. Clegg, it sounds like you think reciprocity should be perhaps one of those principles.
I think the First Amendment principle of voice for the maximum number of people, for the maximum amount of time, wherever they reside around the world, is a good principle.
Well, the problem, I think we're trying to figure out what the appropriate framework is to think about what you all do day in and day out, because it's just presented a bunch of novel and difficult questions. But before social media companies existed, it seems to me we had doctrines, laws that governed the way that we dealt with the subject matter we're talking about here today. Of course, what's so different today is that you are private entities, so presumably the Constitution, the First Amendment can't be directly applied. I know the Supreme Court is wrestling with how to figure out what the right way to view social media companies is. You have your terms of use, which strike me as a pretty powerful tool to be able to regulate what's on your site, but there's also legitimate concerns about censorship of views. And of course, Mr. Clegg, you talked a little bit about Mr. Zuckerberg's letter and the fact he regrets that Meta was being influenced and cooperating with the federal government. And then we have regulations that usually help us in this area, or as a last resort, litigation. So I'm wondering, is there anything about the way that we operated in the legal framework we operated under before your companies existed that should inform the way that we view your operations today? It strikes me as we are dealing with adversaries often that view this information warfare is a legitimate tool. And obviously the Russians and their active measure campaign existed long before your companies existed. But we're an open society, and we believe in freedom of exchange and free speech. But is there anything about the way that we regulated, or the framework under which we understood that newspapers, radio, movies, other means of communication were handled pre-social media companies that should guide us here, or are we just trying to make this up from scratch?
The one thing I would say, without getting into, I think your very important question about sort of the history of regulation of communications in the country, and one could have, I'm sure, a vibrant debate about Section 230 and the like, is this. It's easy to spend all our time on the issues where we disagree. I think the most important thing is we identify where we actually do agree across the political aisle and across the industry. Because if we can act based on common consensus to address the foreign adversaries emphasizing again that word foreign and nation states, we can do the most important thing I think we need to do this year. And I think that can build the foundation for the future. And then we'll deal with the rest and your very important question among that.
My time's up.
And again, I want to commend Senator Cornyn for raising this because we did actually do that on the question about CCP control of a platform that candidly is even more popular at this point than your platforms. And 80% of the Congress in both political parties said that's not in our national security interest. And I appreciate you raising it. Senator Bennett.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your